Hello again. So again, we're gonna do a little bit of a different one. We're not gonna go really deep into the philosophy for now, but we're gonna kind of get some things that we can construct so we can use them as pieces in bigger puzzles later on. So I thought another really interesting thing to talk about would be beauty, and I think this is a topic that interests a lot of people because there's been a lot of different concepts of beauty, and our concept that we have in traditional society today is very different than what has been traditionally held. So I think it's really interesting to counterpose our position with theirs, and we can get kind of an idea of how this has changed throughout time. So where this became really interesting to me was when I was doing my archaeology work. I was reading about a lot of people who are doing this. So this is not as extreme as some, but some of these guys that manipulate their cranial cavities will actually, you've maybe seen pictures of it, but it'll actually go way out the back here. These will be very extreme forms of it. And especially in South America, there's some incredible specimens that go way out the back, and in Middle East as well, and sort of along the west coast of North America actually too. But this was when I read about the stories about there's a really famous book by Dinkos that was talking about how people in these societies usually found this very beautiful to have this sort of sloping forehead, and this was something apparently even in French society, and I think it was the 18th century that all young girls did sort of have a sloping forehead, and it kind of became this thing of putting a frog in boiling water when they talk about slowly heating it up. Is maybe this looks strange to us, but it's because it's so extremely different. Maybe it started off, and as long as maybe it was just at one time this was a part of a natural practice that made their heads this shape. Because when a young baby is very young, you can do this, but you have to do it when they're very young. So with processes such as cradle boarding, when people used to carry around their babies on their backs, their head used to be pushed back. So maybe people eventually found that very beautiful, and then it became more extended and more sought after by people pushing their child's heads more and more until it became sort of these extreme forms that we can talk about today. Another one is sort of Victorian society and the really small waist. So they actually ruin their rib cages when they do this. And another example, sort of that extreme, is foot binding in China, and we can see the ring cultures, and I believe this is mostly in northern Thailand, but I think there's other places as well where they do this, where they do this ring binding around their neck, and this stuff is all considered beautiful. So obviously there is a very big subjective element to beauty, and what we're looking into today is sort of what we did for humor, is to look what is the universals in it. So first of all, let's start with this. What is cute? We have the definition given to us by Wordnik here. Cute, attractive, or pretty in a youthful or dainty way. And that's really kind of a good definition, I think. We have some of these characters that are typically thought to be like small puppy, small cat. We have the Pusheen cat here, which everybody thinks is really cute. So what I want us to kind of notice is like the really big body, the really small little hands, and usually big eyes. So it's funny, Pixar's are masters at this, of using big eye and an anime as I guess as well, to sort of convey this innocence. And people often find this very attractive. So if we look at the eye of what are these called now? It's a small tree animal that lives in Australia, I believe. What is it called? Geez, I can't remember at this moment. But you can see they're kind of doing the opposite of what they should be doing. They have the small, and there's a reason for this too. The small inner side, the sort of black portion of the eye, and the iris around is sort of really big, and the small interior element, and this will be something that will be important eventually. They've done a lot of studies on this. So the prognathy of the face, so prognathy means sort of like the elongating forwardness, It's sort of not seen as this way. It's sort of, what's really interesting is if you take a wild animal and domesticate it, and you don't really put it in any of the situations where it has to survive with sort of red of tooth and claw, as a famous poet once put it, where they don't have to survive in this harsh world, they'll sort of have a juvenilization of their face. And this will happen and it will stay with them because they live this sort of easy, light life. They don't have to really need testosterone in the world in order to be stronger or survive in it and be colder. So people often relate this to innocence, and this is more cute than beautiful, but it's important to discuss because we want to do a very comprehensive overview of this stuff. With a picture such as this, and I apologize with the circles there, but we see we have a lot of conflict in our mind about this. So we have this sort of thing that's portrayed as very cute, and they're really an interesting series. I recommend that you guys look them up and pay some homage to the people that created them because they're very interesting. But we have these sort of like teddy bear sort of feet, and it'll be posted in or below the video as far as the link. And we have these sort of innocent eyes in the situation where we believe that innocence is lost. So we have that sort of element of kind of humorous because it's breaking our expectation of the situation and how people are supposed to react in it. And the little fish is being ate. So the thing we'll say about cuteness is maybe it's very much like innocence. So Audrey Hepburn often talked about this, and in previous generations, I think it was more desirable for women to be this sort of innocence. And this goes back and forth, of course. And Audrey is sort of the perfect model of this. And it's really interesting what she writes here. So this is one of her most famous quotes: "For beautiful eyes, look for the good in others. For beautiful lips, speak only words of kindness. And for poise, walk with the knowledge that you are never alone." And the first two probably make sense. This last one won't make as much sense, but we'll talk about it actually in the future. We have sort of young boys that are usually in every generation that become boy bands, and you'll see men, especially older men, really hate these boy bands. And I think because they sort of try to portray innocence and they're male, a lot of guys are sort of pushed into being more non-innocent, to be strong and to be kind of callous towards the world. So callous meaning sort of having no feeling towards the world and having to be the strength in the situation. And we're trained to do that. So our reaction to somebody else that's still doing that, which would be my generation in sync here, would be just to see them very negatively. No, I have no problems with any of these guys. I actually really like Timberlake. I think he's a pretty solid dude. But especially some people that don't like their innocence, or maybe got in trouble because they were too innocent, hate these kind of things. And this is just one example. And maybe this won't be the thing that triggers some people that do hate their innocence, but some people do hate their innocence because it got them hurt or whatever else. But I'm going to say that cute is basically equated with innocence. And there's another picture of Hepburn. What is beautiful then? So if we look at the Wordnik's definition again, we see a quality or combination of qualities that gives pleasure to the mind and senses, and often associates with the properties such as harmony of form or color, proportion, authenticity, or originality. And there's lots of different things that can be applied to, right? Often we apply it to women more often, and that's what the second definition kind of alludes to here. But it can be applied to anything. So this is stained glass in a church. I'm assuming anyway, and people will use the word beautiful for it. And here we have Nefertiti, who is from the sort of first realistically depicted person in ancient Egypt, as far as when they were doing statues of them. And her husband was a very interesting person. He kind of changed the religion in ancient Egypt. And a lot of people think of her as one of the most beautiful people in history, and people seeing her, this bust, this sculpture is in Germany, and I seen it myself in Germany, and I don't know if I was blown away, as some people said, but it's hard to kind of get a full feel with it when there's so many people around it. So who knows? But a lot of people define it in a lot of different ways, and we have Sappho here, who often wrote about this. And Sappho was a lady from the island of Lesbos. This is where we get the word lesbian today, is from Sappho's very famous poetry, and everybody had a ton of respect for her poetry, and she would often talk about a lot of this beauty. If we look throughout the world, we can see that there's a lot of differentiation as far as what people perceive as beautiful. So they do a lot of these different things where they ask this lady gives her photo to a bunch of different countries, and they're supposed to make her more beautiful. And there's not much that's universal. If you go through these, a lot of the hair color will change. The lip shape will kind of change, but usually they're full lips, and usually they're big eyes. That's maybe the only thing that really remains consistent. So you can see some of the jaw lines go really, like some Philippines here is a very strong jawline. They really differentiate heavily on that one. Some cultures it's a very thin jawline. Um, so there's not much that's consistent as far as that. But the two things that we notice are sort of big eyes and big lips. And people with thin lips are often seen as just sort of as a wives' tale, they call it now, but they're seen as people that are very callous. So maybe the lips represent something that biologically can be influenced by your personality, just like we were talking about how a young animal that is raised in a situation where it doesn't have to defend itself, maybe your biology can be influenced by your immediate surroundings and how you have to survive. So we take quotes from beautiful people. We'll go with Justin Timberlake first, just because I was talking about him earlier. So he says, "Sexy to me is the way you carry what you have. I have a big nose, but I rock it." So everybody's got something that maybe isn't conventionally thought as beautiful, but it's really Sophia Loren puts us the best, I think. So beauty is how you feel on the inside and reflects in your eyes. It's not something physical. Nothing makes a woman more beautiful than the belief that she is beautiful. So this is basically just confidence, is what they're saying. So you have what you have, and nobody thinks they're perfect, despite what some people may say. But if you really believe it, and I think this gets back to why I wanted to teach about the difference between anger and humor, being the sort of one's the ego's view and one's the subconscious's view, because I think that if you believe you're beautiful in the sort of subconscious belief rather than the ego belief, that it will come off naturally, and this confidence. And I believe that the ego's version will be somebody that's very boastful, and usually people don't like that kind of person. And there might be a mixture of both of those things, but I think it's the one that makes you beautiful is the subconscious one. A good example of this is a story that I've heard referenced a couple times in many books. And it was a story about Marilyn Monroe taking the subway. And I think she had a hat and sunglasses on, or she wasn't really that hidden by the way that people tell the story. But she was just out, and nobody noticed who she was because she was just riding the train in the morning. And she rode it into town, and she came to the top of the stairs, and there was some publisher or there was some reporter that was with her. And then she just said, "Okay, do you want to meet her?" It's referring to Marilyn Monroe as this sort of other entity of herself. And then as soon as she did, she just kind of shook out her hair, took off her sunglasses, and changed her posture. And everybody immediately was drawn to her. And she just became this swirling, chaotic ball of people trying to get her attention and talk to her. And she was obviously one of the biggest stars in the world at the time. But it shows you the importance of how people can just ignore, and you could really make the argument, contrary to what I'm trying to allude to, that just because you wear sunglasses or whatever else. But I really think that as soon as somebody changes their posture, as soon as somebody changes their temperament, they gain that confidence that people will automatically recognize them, and they'll fill, as long as they fill that role that they're supposed to fill, that people will be instantly drawn to them. And I found this for my own life as well. Uh, People sometimes say, "Oh, beauty symmetry." We have two images here that are equally symmetrical. So obviously, it's not exactly symmetry. And we haven't talked about Casanova in our culture as being this incredible womanizer. Whenever you're really good with women, like people call you as Casanova. And if we look at Casanova, this is one of the better pictures of him actually. If you look at some other ones, he just an ordinary looking guy. I mean, there was nothing spectacular about him, but he was. People often talked about his confidence. People often talked about his drive and about his determination and what he did. And he was very successful because of those reasons. And it had nothing to do with very base beauty. Like there was nothing about him that was extraordinarily drawing to people. But I think it was mostly just confidence. Is handsome different? Uh, of a man, good looking, of a substantial sum. You can really, it's kind of the same situation. Males, because of testosterone, often get, me being a physical anthropologist, I know that there's certain spots in the face. So if we look at Justin here, Justin's not really typically strong male features, but usually there's supraorbital notches here. There's really sharp jawline that males get because of lots of testosterone going through the bones, are being represented by the bones at least. There's toruses back here that really bulge out in the back of his neck because he's got muscles that attach here that is a result of all of his of the testosterone in his body. There's a lot of different spots, especially you could tell from a skull whether it's male or female, and it kind of, you can really see it here with the contouring. One picture which is exactly the same, you can see it on both sides here, and based on the masculine contouring, bringing it more sharp angles and inward, and then opening for a female, making it more flat and formless. So remember what we talked about with the wild animals. They become more juvenilized, their faces become more pressed in, more flat, and if they become more high amounts of testosterone or high amounts of whatever they need in order to survive, which is these brain chemicals that will induce more muscle growth and more bone growth, they'll get longer noses and become more threatening looking. And the male version of it is a little bit of that, but it's basically the same thing beyond that. A little dog, we can see, has sort of a puppy version of the bigger dog. And they'll be permanently like this because there's nothing that really requires them to become super competitive or fight for their food or anything else. This kind of reminds me of Kalos Kathagos. I think I'm pronouncing it wrong, but that's okay. So this is a Greek term, and the picture I'm showing is actually referring to the Knights of the Round Table. But these are very similar concepts of beauty in both of these two situations. And Kalos Kathagos, or Kathagos, would talk about beauty as being part of this whole virtuous set that you had to have. And it was all part of the same thing. So they would say virtue, skill, strength, brave, and beautiful. And it was all part of the same thing. And they couldn't be detached from each other. How do you attain innocence? Well, I would say, we looked at babies in the last video, and we would mostly say that they're pretty innocent when they're born. How do you maintain it? Well, you don't do all the things that are going to get you into trouble, right? So you remain sheltered and you retain your innocence in the same way that our lady was saying, look at the world look at the world as though it's beautiful, look upon everything as you're innocent. That was with the advice that she gave in order to bolster her beauty or her innocence or whatever it was. And how do you become confident? Well, you become good at things. You improve things like your strength and your skills, and you're brave. You have to be brave in that process as well. And virtue would be something related to this innocence thing, right? So this is just another way of conveying what I'm getting across here, is that these things are not random. There's no set of characteristics in any culture that make you beautiful. There's sort of things that are subjective and there are things that are objective, I think. And the two objective things are sort of these innocence and confidence. And we'll talk about those both a little bit more in the future. But for now, we'll leave this one as it is. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll talk to you soon.